Before the myth of Dracula ever took form, there was a man who needed no fiction to strike terror into the hearts of his enemies. A man so brutal, so inventive in his cruelty that his name would echo through history as a warning, a nightmare, and a legend. His name was Vlad Țepeș, Vlad the Impaler. To his enemies, he was the devil reborn. To his people, he was justice carved in blood. He didn't drink blood, he made it flow. In this dark journey, we'll descend into the forests of medieval Wallachia, where justice was measured in screams and mercy was impaled on 10-foot stakes. If you crave the truth behind the legend, if you dare to look beyond the veil of myth, then subscribe to Dark Hours Archive. Here, history doesn't just whisper, it screams. Now turn off the lights and steal your mind. Vlad is waiting. In the great halls of history, few figures loom as large and terrifying as Vlad the Impaler, yet this infamous ruler did not emerge fully formed from the mists of time. No, the story of Vlad the Impaler started not in a castle but in a dungeon. In the bleak winter of 1431, within the fortified town of nestled in the heart of Transylvania, a child was born. To the townsfolk, it was just another birth. To Vlad the Impaler, it was the beginning of a torment that would last a lifetime. You see, that child was destined to bear the name Vlad III. His father, Vlad II, Dracula, bore the name of the dragon. The title had been bestowed upon him by the Order of the Dragon, a holy order founded by the King of Hungary. Their purpose was as clear as their title, to shield Christian Europe from the rising tide of the Ottoman Empire. Yet titles meant little in those chaotic lands. Wallachia, the region that would make Vlad the Impaler famous, was not a kingdom, it was a battleground, a pawn in the relentless game of thrones being played by the Catholic kings of Hungary and the ambitious Muslim sultans of the East. From his birthplace in Caesarea to the courts of Targovitz, young Vlad's life was a series of betrayals and bloodshed. Even his parents' love was tainted by this environment. Vlad's mother, whose name has been lost to time, was little more than a pawn in his father's game, a noblewoman wed to secure alliances rather than to forge a bond. Her role was to bear children, not to nurture them. Little Vlad was largely left to the wolves, an eerie foreshadowing of the brutality he would one day become infamous for. No, to survive in Wallachia meant to be as cunning as a fox and as enduring as an ox. And Vlad II, Prince of Wallachia, was a master of this dark art. He shifted allegiances like sand dunes in a storm, pledging fealty to Hungary one moment, to the Ottomans the next. To survive, Vlad learned to read his father's moods, to navigate the treacherous courts, and to keep his ears and eyes open for any threat. For in Wallachia, trust was a luxury, a weakness that could get you skewered on a pike. And speaking of pikes, Vlad's 5th year brought him face to face with the grim reality of his homeland. A thief had pilfered from the royal kitchen. A small offense, perhaps, but one that had consequences. The thief was caught, brought before the prince, and then raised up on a sharpened stake. It was a spectacle designed to send a message. Don't steal, or you'll end up like this. Young Vlad watched his mind absorbing the lesson, his heart already hardening. He would repeat this scene countless times, but here it was a lesson, not an entertainment. By the time Vlad was 10, he understood the precarious nature of his people's existence. The threat of the Ottomans loomed large, and the boyars, the local nobility, were as unpredictable as the weather. It was a harsh lesson in survival, one that shaped his character and hardened his resolve. But the biggest blow came when Vlad was just 11 years old. His father was summoned by the Ottomans, and as a sign of good faith, he offered his 2 eldest sons, Vlad and his brother Radu, as hostages. This was a custom of the time, a way to ensure that the ruler kept to his agreements. But for Vlad, it was the start of his personal hell. Torn from his home, he was marched across hostile lands to the Ottoman heartland, a journey that lasted nearly 3 years. There, in the opulent yet alien courts of Sultan Murad II, Vlad learned the ways of the enemy he had been trained to despise. Stripped of his princely titles, he became simply Vlad III, a lowly hostage at the mercy of the Sultan's whims. His status was a precarious one, constantly shifting, depending on the favor of his captors. But Vlad adapted. He learned the Turkish language, customs, and even took on a new name, Ladadi, or Blood. It was a grim foreshadowing of the bloody deeds he would become known for. It was a training ground of sorts, a crash course in statecraft, deception, and survival. Though it was brutal, it also provided Vlad with a perspective that few of his enemies could claim. He saw the Ottoman Empire not as a distant, invincible force, but as a collection of individuals, each with their own ambitions and fears. This understanding would serve him well when he returned to Wallachia. He would use it to play the Ottomans against the Hungarians and carve out a niche of power for himself. But that time was not yet. For now, young Vlad was still a captive, enduring a fate far worse than death, a fate that was slowly shaping him into the monster he would become. Stay tuned for more historical tales. The throne of Wallachia was not given to Vlad, he took it one corpse at a time. When Vlad returned to his homeland in late 1456, the air smelled of betrayal. The streets were quiet. The nobles watched from their stone towers with cautious eyes. And the people barely dared to hope. Wallachia had become a graveyard of rulers. In the last decade, 3 princes had taken the throne. All had died murdered, overthrown, or disappeared into the cold fog of history. The land was split between the influence of Hungary in the west and the Ottoman Empire in the east. And in the middle stood the boyards vultures draped in silk, who whispered to whichever side paid more. When Vlad crossed into the capital city of Targovik, he didn't announce himself as a king. He arrived in silence. No trumpets, no parades, only soldiers and vengeance. The current ruler, Vladislav II, a puppet installed by Hungary, had grown complacent. He had not expected the scrawny boy they once exiled to return with Ottoman support and a heart full of bloodlust. The confrontation was swift, a duel cold steel in the night. Vlad killed Vladislav himself, slicing through the man's defenses like parchment. Some say he didn't stop at death, that he defiled the body. Others say he stood over the corpse and whispered, "Now, they will learn, the throne was his," and so was the retribution. He summoned the boyars, those same nobles who had betrayed his father, those who had watched his brother die screaming, those who had lived fat and unpunished. While Vlad rotted in foreign chains, he invited them to a lavish Easter feast in the royal court. Silken banners fluttered in the wind. Tables overflowed with roasted meats and honeyed wine. The nobles came dressed in finery, oblivious, laughing, and Vlad greeted them with warmth. He smiled, he toasted. He listened to their lies with patient eyes. Then, when the wine had dulled their suspicions, he stood and raised a single hand. Guards flooded the room. Doors slammed shut. The laughter died. Vlad did not shout. He simply listed names, one by one. He recited their crimes, real or imagined. Collaborations with foreign powers, conspiracies, betrayals, acts of cowardice. Some nobles denied it, others wept. But Vlad had no interest in pleas. He ordered them all arrested. The elderly were impaled on stakes outside the city, their grey heads tilted to the sky as if still in disbelief. The younger ones, men and women alike, were marched on foot to the mountains of Ponary. No food, no water, no horses. Those who collapsed were whipped. Those who cried were dragged. And those who tried to flee were skewered through the stomach and left twitching in the dust. When they reached the mountain, Vlad gave a single command: "Build me a fortress from your bones." And they did. Stone by stone, under the whip and lash, they built Ponary Castle, the future stronghold of the Impaler himself. Those who survived became walking ghosts, forever broken. Those who didn't became foundations. In a matter of weeks, Vlad had done what no Wallachian ruler had accomplished in generations. He had cleansed the land of its corrupt nobility. The message was brutal, but clear. Wallachia would no longer be ruled by cowardice, not by foreign kings, not by backroom whispers, only by terror. And the people noticed. The merchants, the peasants, the farmers, those who had long lived under the thumb of the boyards began to speak of Vlad with awe. Not love, never love, but something close to respect. He imposed strict laws, punishing theft, dishonesty, and laziness with vicious efficiency. A man who stole a single coin might find his hand nailed to the city gate. A woman who lied could have her tongue cut out and displayed in the village square. But in this reign of terror, something strange happened. Order, crime plummeted, roads were safe, trade flourished. The forests echoed less with screams of the oppressed, and more with the silence of obedience. Vlad's court became a machine of punishment, but it worked. He surrounded himself not with nobles, but with loyal soldiers and foreign mercenaries, men who feared him more than death itself. He made alliances when necessary. He paid tribute to the Ottomans, but always with veiled contempt. He dined with emissaries, but made them tremble. One famous tale survives. An Ottoman delegation arrived in his court, refusing to remove their turbans as a sign of respect for their customs. Vlad, ever gracious, responded, "Then let them never be removed." He ordered their turbans nailed to their skulls. No one ever tested his hospitality again. By 1459, Wallachia was no longer a torn borderland. It was a kingdom of fear, and Vlad was its undisputed master. But this was only the beginning. because impalement, his signature punishment, was still in its infancy. The world had seen his wrath, but not yet his art. And soon, his enemies, Turks, Hungarians, Saxons, even his own subjects would come to learn. Vlad did not simply kill, he transformed death into architecture, into language, into a monument of warning so horrific, it could silence an entire army. And the stakes were just being sharpened. The first stake was a warning, the 100th was a message, but the 1000th, that was when people began to whisper that Vlad Țepeș was no longer a man but a curse upon the earth. In the early years of his reign, once the boyars had been removed and the throne secured, Vlad turned his focus to the unrest festering within Wallachia. Petty thieves, lawless gangs, silent conspirators. To Vlad, order was not a virtue, it was a necessity. Without it, chaos would return, and he had not survived betrayal and imprisonment to be undone by corruption and indiscipline, so he enforced his justice. At first, the punishments were local. A merchant caught defrauding customers was publicly condemned. A village leader who allowed lawlessness to grow was removed with finality. Warnings were issued, then punishment followed, firm, visible, and unforgettable. The people began to understand that this was no ordinary prince. This was someone who believed that fear was more persuasive than law. Legends began to take shape. A noble woman accused of deceit faced royal judgment. When found guilty, her fate became the subject of hushed retellings in taverns and fields alike, not because of its brutality, though it was severe, but because of its symbolism. "Let all be diligent," the townspeople said afterward, repeating his words like a proverb. These acts weren't random, they were intentional. A dark code of discipline, written not with ink but with example. He didn't just punish criminals, he redefined crime, dishonesty, idleness, disloyalty. To Vlad, these were not minor failings, they were threats to the very stability of his rule, and all threats had to be neutralized. He often rode through villages in disguise, dressed as a common traveler. He listened, he observed. If he heard whispers of unrest or signs of disrespect, he remembered, and he returned with consequences. His chosen method of punishment soon became infamous. The stake, it wasn't the number of victims that shocked the world, it was the methodical way they were displayed. Every stake sent a message. Justice had a form now, and it was impossible to ignore. Over time, communities fell quiet, not because they were empty, but because no one dared speak carelessly. But perhaps the most chilling episode from this early purge was what became known behind closed doors as the banquet of the poor. Reports had reached Vlad that cities were being overwhelmed by beggars and the sick, straining resources and risking the spread of disease. So he summoned them to a great hall. There, they were fed, given warmth, shelter, and then, the hall was sealed. What happened next is still debated. Some say it was a fire, others say it was a symbolic act meant to make a brutal point. But the result was the same, none survived. When asked why, Vlad is said to have answered, they would be of no use to themselves, or to others, or to the world. To some, it was a cleansing, to others, an unspeakable cruelty. Either way, few ever sought alms again under his rule. But Vlad's punishments were not limited to the vulnerable. His real hatred was reserved for betrayal. Local governors who grew too powerful quietly disappeared. Religious leaders who publicly questioned his harsh governance found their authority revoked or worse. Even his foreign guests were not exempt. One tale describes a noble who refused to remove his headwear in Vlad's presence. What followed was a punishment so grotesque that it passed into legend as a cautionary tale about pride and etiquette. No trials, no debates, only finality. But Vlad didn't hide these actions, he broadcasted them. Foreign merchants saw the aftermath, ambassadors carried the rumors home, and nobles abroad began to wonder what might happen should they cross the border into Wallachia. The fear became international. Saxon traders from Transylvania, once dismissive of Wallachian politics, began writing home with reports of horrific displays, roads lined with victims, villages emptied, and punishments too grim to repeat in full. In one account, an entire village was found emptied, with every home abandoned. A single note had been left behind. They harbored traitors. Whether this was fact or fiction, it spread like wildfire, and behind the horror lay a kind of genius. This wasn't madness, it was control. Vlad had realized that the world didn't respect treaties. It didn't respect laws. It respected one thing: consequence. So he built a kingdom where disobedience had a price, and that price was steep. To outsiders, he was a tyrant, a demon, a madman. But to those who lived under his rule, those who obeyed him, was something else entirely: voivode, ruler, protector. Because, under Vlad's rule, the roads were safe. Merchants could travel without fear of bandits. Peasants could sleep knowing they would not be taxed into starvation, because in Vlad's Wallachia the law was not a book, it was a man, and he stood in his tower, cloaked in silence and fire, whispering, "Obey, or vanish." When Vlad the Impaler returned to power in 1456, it was like a nightmare given form. Within weeks, he had most of his enemies staked, flayed or strangled. Those who hadn't betrayed his father or supported his rivals were spared. At least it was a cleansing. And Vlad, now in his early 30s, had changed. Gone was the boy who wept. In his place stood a predator, and he wasn't done. He built a state within a state, a network of informants and enforcers. Every peasant, noble, merchant, or priest knew someone who had seen the Dragon Prince at work. They knew of the castles turned meat grinders, the public squares stained with blood, and the whisper that followed Vlad everywhere he went. Vlad the Impaler. They didn't break his body, they broke his soul, and somehow that was worse. He ruled like a god over his domain, and his people lived in perpetual fear. That, too, was power. Power fed his growing obsession with impalement. Like an artist testing materials, he tried different methods. First he dipped his bread in blood, then he covered his loaf completely in blood. Dipped it in blood, then he covered the whole thing in blood. Do you think he'd be satisfied with merely dipping his bread in blood? No, he'd cover the entire loaf in blood. And slowly, methodically, he spread the bloodshed across his lands. Enemies, real or imagined, were silenced permanently. Entire villages were wiped out for sheltering outlaws. The local lords, caught between anger and fear, paid him tribute in gold and livestock, which he used to build a bigger army, to fortify his borders and to refine his tastes. The endless variety of human flesh fascinated him. Soon, feeding his people with human meat seasoned with herbs and spices became a perverse delicacy. They called it the taste of victory. For the prince, it was the taste of revenge. But the Ottomans had honed Vlad to perfection, and soon he was ready to use his new skills against them. As the Ottoman-Hungarian War raged around him, Vlad led daring raids deep into enemy territory. His men, fierce and fanatical, slaughtered everyone in sight. They raped, pillaged and returned to Vlad with severed heads and tales of carnage. The spoils of war were piled high in Wallachia, and Vlad basked in the glow of his victories. For him, it didn't matter if his own land suffered. If the Ottomans bled, if the Hungarians bled, it was a worthy exchange. His legend grew, nurtured by the countless fires where men were cooked in their own fat, women were skinned alive, and children were roasted whole. He reveled in the notoriety, sending invitations to nearby rulers with severed hands attached. To the messengers, they carried warnings, threats, and invitations to dinner. Soon, stories of Vlad's brutality echoed beyond the Carpathian Mountains. Farmers in Germany heard of his deeds and wove them into songs. As the sun set on Vlad's domain, peasants gathered around flickering fires, singing of the noble knight, brave Sir Vlad the Impaler, who dipped his bread in the blood of kings. We'll meet again in another life. The forest of the impaled had scared off an empire, but Vlad knew something far more dangerous was coming. Not foreign armies, not swords, but whispers. Whispers from within his own court. He had ruled with terror. Yes, but terror is a double-edged blade. Keeps enemies at bay, but it also breeds paranoia. And in Wallachia, betrayal was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. The Bojars he had spared were not grateful. He had bought their silence, yes, but their resentment had only grown. For them, he was a butcher, a monster, and they waited for a stumble, a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor of the dragon. And abroad, Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary, Vlad's supposed Christian ally, began to reconsider his loyalty. Vlad's methods were becoming difficult to justify in the eyes of Europe. Ambassadors from the Holy Roman Empire brought with them horrifying stories, forests of corpses, rivers red with blood, and peasants impaled for crimes as small as stealing bread. The church looked too hungry for action, and Corvinesova, the politician, began to see Vlad as a liability. Meanwhile, back in Wallachia, Vlad's reign was growing increasingly paranoid. He trusted no one, not his advisors, not his servants, not even his own guards. He began rotating soldiers constantly. Anyone who served him too long was either disappeared or replaced. He changed the locations of his sleeping quarters each night. He banned closed doors in his court. Even laughter was viewed with suspicion. What were they laughing at? Who had told the joke? Was the joke about him? Vlad had become a specter in his own castle, drifting from room to room with daggers hidden beneath his robes, eyes that never blinked, and ears tuned to silence more than words. Then came the letters. They were discovered by one of Vlad's spy secret correspondences between the Bojars and the Hungarians. The nobles had grown weary of Vlad's rule. The fear that once kept them silent had now turned to desperation. They wanted him gone, and they had a plan. In the dead of night, they would open the gates of Targovect to Hungarian troops, who would seize Vlad and install a more reasonable ruler. The moment Vlad learned of the plot, something snapped. He summoned every boyar still alive and held a special council. The nobles arrived, nervous but masked in smiles. They bowed, they praised his victories, they lied, and Vlad listened. He nodded, he smiled, he poured them wine, and then, without changing his tone, without raising his voice, he spoke. "I know your letters. I know your plans. I know your treachery." They froze. Some tried to speak, others collapsed to their knees. One tried to flee, but the guards were already behind him, swords drawn. That night, over 200 nobles were impaled just outside the city walls. Vlad personally oversaw the placement of each stake. He ordered the taller ones for the richer boyars, shorter ones for their sons. A special crooked stake was made for one noble who had mocked Vlad's mother. It spiraled through the gut before exiting the mouth. The executions lasted 3 days, and during it all Vlad did not eat, did not sleep. He simply watched, stone-faced, unblinking, and when it was done, he restructured his entire government. The noble class was replaced with commoners, soldiers, and foreigners, men loyal not to bloodlines, but to fear, loyal to him. But the internal threats didn't stop. Not long after, he discovered a plot among his own guards. A handful of soldiers had been bribed to poison his food. They were tortured, interrogated, then impaled inside the castle walls so he could look upon them daily as he dined. Even his mistresses were not exempt. One woman, suspected of passing information to Hungarian spies, was summoned to Vlad's chambers. He embraced her, kissed her, then stabbed her through the heart with a golden dagger, whispering, "Even love can rot." The castle grew quieter. Visitors became rarer. Vlad's own family stopped writing. He was no longer just feared, he was isolated, and that, perhaps, was his greatest weakness. Because outside his walls, the world was shifting. Matthias Corvinus, pressured by the Pope and eager to maintain alliances, began to act. He denounced Vlad's behavior publicly and in secret. He supported Vlad's brother Radu, once the soft child of Ottoman captivity, now a polished diplomat and military commander. The Ottomans, too, saw an opportunity. They offered Radu their full support, promising him the Wallachian throne in exchange for loyalty. In 1462, while Vlad prepared for another campaign against Turkish incursions, Radu crossed the border with an Ottoman-backed force, and for the first time Vlad found himself abandoned. The people, broken and afraid, did not rise to defend him. The nobles who remained remembered the stakes. The soldiers hesitated, and Vlad fled, not in disgrace, but in silence. He escaped north, into Hungarian territory, seeking protection from Matthias Corvinus. But Corvinus had already made his choice. Vlad was arrested, his titles revoked, his freedom stolen. Just like that, the Impaler became a prisoner once more, not in a Turkish dungeon, this time, but in a European cell walls that echoed with Latin prayers instead of Arabic chants. And the stakes, they remained in the ground, swaying gently in the wind, waiting for their master to return. Vlad the Impaler changed the way we live, changed the way we govern, and his transformation started with a single choice. A choice that day. One execution. That single execution cut through years of resentment, setting him apart from the rest. His victims became symbols. His methods, brutal but efficient. He took what was owed and made sure everyone noticed, and in doing so he established something new in Wallachia. He established fear. Now, fear is a potent tool, but it's not control. To wield it effectively, you must be careful. You have to know when to use it, how to apply it, and above all, how to make it stick. Vlad realized this. His wasn't the typical ruler. He wasn't interested in amassing wealth, waging wars, or expanding borders. His focus was on authority, on instilling obedience, on making his rule undeniable. He governed with a singular purpose. And he chose to do this through something the nobility understood: power. For Vlad, accumulating power wasn't about personal gain, but about creating balance. He was assembling not just an arsenal, but a deterrent, a silent warning to those who might dare to challenge him. Each fortified town, each strategic alliance, each display of wealth served as a reminder of his resolve. He surrounded himself with competent men, people like Ionku of Brezova, whose loyalty and skills were invaluable in solidifying Vlad's rule. Around him, he created a network of spies and informants, ensuring that eyes and ears were everywhere, gathering information, noticing anomalies, and identifying threats. His grip on power was absolute, leaving no room for conspiracy or hidden agendas. Now, if you want to maintain authority, you have to make it visible. You have to make it undeniable. And Vlad did that brilliantly. He organized public displays of power, hunting expeditions that showcased his skills, military parades that underlined his strength, even tournaments that seemed like festive events, but were also tests of loyalty and obedience. These events weren't merely spectacles, they were tools of governance. They communicated his strength, his determination, and his right to rule. Vlad used every tool at his disposal to demonstrate his authority, including the most powerful weapon of all, justice. His punishments were severe, but so were his rewards. He gave land to those who served him well, legitimizing their gains with public recognition. In doing so, he created a network of loyal supporters who benefited directly from his rule. As Vlad tightened his grip on power, he became a symbol, not just of strength, but of a new way of governing. He demonstrated that power, if wielded correctly, could bring order, stability, and even prosperity. His methods were extreme, yes, but so were the challenges he faced. In a world of constant upheaval, Vlad offered a vision of controlled chaos, of order amidst anarchy, and this resonated with many. Vlad the Impaler didn't just rule, he commanded. He didn't just lead, he inspired both admiration and fear. His transformation from a troubled prince to a ruthless ruler teaches us about power, the kind of power that makes us question the line between a villain and a hero. But more importantly, it reminds us that leadership isn't just about charisma or popularity. Sometimes it's about control, about establishing dominance, and about making your presence felt. In Vlad's case, it was about surviving, about turning a legacy of shame into a legacy of strength. They had chained his body, but they could never chain his will. Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia, and a name that carried fear across continents, had fallen, not to swords or rebellion but to politics. He was no longer on the battlefield, but within the cold stone walls of a European fortress. His captor, Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, once an ally, now a cautious observer, wary of the growing controversy surrounding Vlad's reign. To the outside world, Corvinus claimed his hands were tied. Vlad's rule had become too controversial. Whispers of excessive cruelty had spread across borders. It was easier to silence him quietly than confront him directly. And so, Vlad became a prisoner, not broken, just ... waiting. 12 years passed. While most would have faded into obscurity or despair, Vlad remained vigilant. He read, he observed, he listened, even locked away. His presence unsettled those around him. Guards spoke in hushed tones. Visitors avoided eye contact. Some claimed he had grown even more calculating. Strange rumors emerged, that he spoke to no one but himself, that he spent hours gazing out his window, unmoving, that he was simply waiting for the world to change, and it did. By the early 1470s, the Ottoman Empire, long a dominant force, began pushing deeper into the Balkans once again. Wallachia, under Vlad's brother Radu, grew unstable. Radu passed in 1475 under mysterious circumstances, and suddenly Wallachia had no ruler. The nobles who once feared Vlad began to reconsider. Say what you will about his methods, he had kept the borders safe. He had ruled with strength, and strength, now more than ever, was needed. A request was made to King Corvinus: release Vlad, let him return under guidance. Of course, Corvinus, reluctant but practical, agreed, and in 1476, Vlad was freed. He did not return as the same man who had ruled before. He was older, colder, sharper. He returned to Wallachia not with a vast army but with a purpose: to reclaim control. His return was swift and precise. Those who had worked against him were quietly removed from power. Some were exiled, others disappeared from public view. His presence alone was enough to restore a sense of discipline. But this new reign was different. The political situation was more fragile. The Ottoman Empire was watching closely. Tensions rose. Small attacks began along the borders, and Vlad responded decisively, but now with international eyes watching his every move. His support among the nobles wavered, alliances shifted like sand, and enemies gathered in the shadows. By December of 1476, the final blow arrived. The details of his death are debated to this day. Some say he fell in battle, others claim it was an ambush, orchestrated from within. There are even accounts suggesting mistaken identity, a tragic confusion on the battlefield. What is certain is this: Vlad the Impaler died, and his death marked the end of an era. His body was lost to time, but his head, according to many chroniclers, was sent to the Ottoman court as proof of his demise. It was the final act in a lifetime of symbolism, the end of a man who had once ruled through fear, precision, and strategy. Wallachia, now silent, felt the absence. Though he had ruled with an iron grip, many quietly admitted that life had been more secure under his reign. The roads were safer, the borders held strong, order harsh as it was had existed. In the wake of his death, stories spread like wildfire. Some called him a monster, others a savior. Some whispered that he had become something more, a myth, a symbol, a legend. He was called many names: a tyrant, a protector, a relic of a darker time. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Vlad the Impaler was a ruler forged by betrayal, tested by conflict, and remembered not for kindness, but for clarity. His justice was absolute, his methods unforgettable. To him, order was not passive. It was something built, enforced, and guarded. And though his time had ended, his story had just begun, retold for centuries, reimagined by poets, feared by generations, not because he lived forever, but because the idea of him never died. Vlad's head had rotted, but his legend was just beginning to breathe. The year was 1476. The Impaler's corpse lay somewhere in the dirt of Wallachia, lost, mutilated, or secretly buried by those still loyal to him. His severed head, on the other hand, hung on a Turkish pike, just outside the gates of Istanbul. Flies buzzed around it like carrion priests. The Sultan himself walked past it every day, not to mock it, but to remember, because no matter what anyone said, Vlad Țepeș had stopped him once, not with an army, but with terror so refined it became almost divine. And that was the real power of Vlad. Death didn't silence him, it amplified him. In the years after his execution, stories about the Impaler began to spread across Europe faster than horses, deeper than swords. They passed from merchant to merchant, from monk to noble, and as they passed, they twisted. One tale became 10, 10 became 100, the truth dissolved, and all that remained was myth. The Germans, ever fond of printed pamphlets and grim morality tales, began publishing lurid woodcuts of Vlad. They showed him dining among forests of corpses, sipping blood from golden goblets, laughing as infants were boiled alive. In one account he was described as a demon clad in flesh, whose soul was sewn with needles, whose heart beat only when blood flowed. Other stories claimed he kept a library of death where every corpse told a tale, and every stake bore a name. And through it all one word began to emerge, a name, a title. Akauji, Dracula. To the Romanians, Dracula simply meant son of the dragon, a reference to Vlad's father, Vlad III, named for his membership in the chivalric Order of the Dragon. But to the rest of Europe, especially the terrified West, the name took on a darker hue. It wasn't just about dragons anymore. It was about the devil. Dracul in Romanian also meant demon, and so Dracula became not a lineage, but a sentence. Vlad the Impaler became Vlad the undead, creature who did not die, but waited, who drank not just blood, but souls. This wasn't accidental. Centuries later, in the 19th century, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker would dig through archives and find references to this medieval tyrant, the man who impaled armies, who burned the poor, who used fear as architecture. Stoker was already crafting a story, a gothic horror centered around an immortal predator from the east. When he found the name Dracula, the pages stopped turning. The decision was made. And so the historical Vlad, flawed, brutal, political, was reborn in fiction as Count Dracula, the aristocrat vampire who drinks the blood of innocents and sleeps in a coffin lined with native soil. It was poetic, because Vlad never actually needed fangs, only a message. And in the end, that message outlived him. Even today, tourists flock to the Carpathian Mountains in search of Dracula's castle. Though Vlad never actually lived there, they visit the ruins of Ponary, where Vlad did rule, perched high on a mountain. Its path lined with over 1,400 steps. They buy merchandise, they take photographs, they smile. But if they stand still long enough, if they let the wind rise and the sun fall, they might feel something else. The silence of judgment, the shadow of stakes, the echo of a man who made death a language. Historians debate him to this day. Some call him a genius strategist, a nationalist hero who stood against the might of the Ottomans with nothing but iron will. Others name him a psychopath, a sadist whose mind was so broken by childhood trauma that it could only see peace through pain. But maybe, just maybe, both are true. Maybe Vlad was what the world deserved in that moment. Not a saint, not a savior, but a reminder that evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears a crown. And sometimes, that evil doesn't vanish. It waits, it transforms, it bleeds into the soil, and grows fangs. Because history doesn't die, it only sharpens, and Vlad the Impaler is still watching. Vlad Țepeș was more than a man. He was a warning to emperors, to traitors, to time itself. He turned pain into policy, terror into law, and death into legend. Welcome to my channel. Today we delve into the past to meet Vlad the Impaler, a name that echoes through history, synonymous with darkness and despair. But have you ever wondered who really was Vlad the Impaler? What events shaped him into the ruler he became? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Vlad the Impaler, a tale of survival, vengeance, and the haunting echoes of the past. Our journey begins in the heart of 15th century Eastern Europe, a time when power was a game of cunning and survival. Vlad the Impaler, born into the nobility of Wallachia, finds himself in the unforgiving grip of the Ottoman Empire. As a young lad, his life hangs in the balance. But fate intervenes, offering him a chance at survival. Kidnapped by Ottoman forces, he's taken to the vibrant and treacherous courts of Istanbul, a world away from his homeland. Here, the spoiled rich kid, Radu, Vlad's brother, embraces the luxurious life, shedding his ancestral traditions. Meanwhile, Vlad, the quieter, more observant one, navigates the shadowy recesses of the palace. Here, amidst the silent halls and forgotten cells, he listens intently to the stories of forgotten prisoners. It's here that he absorbs the essence of survival, learning to stay hidden in the shadows, becoming a ghost in his own right. As Vlad delves deeper into these shadowy realms, he encounters a cast of characters, each a testament to the brutal realities of the time. He listens to the aging Turkish generals spin tales of epic battles, of Mongol sieges, and the double-edged nature of brotherhood, revealing how empires are forged not just on dreams, but on the bedrock of obedience and ruthlessness. He observes the sultans and their viziers, men who ruled with charm during the day and unleashed their cruelty under the cloak of night. Vlad watches and learns, understanding that power isn't maintained with justice, but with calculated displays of terror. One day, Vlad witnesses a public execution. A man is impaled, not for a crime against a state, but for insulting a noble's wife. This spectacle of agony and humiliation leaves an indelible mark on young Vlad. He realizes that in this world, respect is not given, but violently taken and brutally enforced. It's a lesson that will echo throughout his life, shaping him into the ruler he will become. In the heart of this brutal education, Vlad discovers the true genius of impalement. He sees it not just as a form of torture, but as a powerful tool of governance, a way to maintain control and instill obedience. He becomes fascinated with the intricacies of this practice, studying how the placement of a stake could prolong suffering, how the height of an impalement could influence the crowd's reaction. He even observes how the fear generated by impalements could deter potential enemies or rivals. In the midst of such darkness, Vlad finds himself drawn to knowledge, eager to understand and master the art of survival and control. Under the watchful gaze of the Ottomans, Vlad transforms into a skilled swordsman. Sparring with Turkish guards, he hones his skills, developing a fighting style that is less about aggression and more about calculated precision, aiming to disable rather than kill. This approach reflects the careful, methodical way he will later govern, always thinking several steps ahead. As years pass, Vlad's transformation continues. He masters the art of poisons, learning their effects and applications, a skill that will serve him well in the intricate game of political survival. Equally important is his dedication to understanding foreign languages. With each word he learns, he gains a tool to manipulate, to deceive, and to control. He becomes fluent in the languages of his captors, enabling him to navigate the complex world of diplomacy with ease. But perhaps the most crucial skill he acquires is the ability to observe, to read the subtle signs of power and influence. He trains himself to listen not just to what is said, but to what remains unspoken, recognizing that, in this world, silence can speak volumes. Meanwhile, Vlad's brother Radu, basking in the lavish lifestyle of the Ottoman court, fails to recognize the danger lurking in the shadows. Radu, now known as the bloodthirsty Sultan, revels in power, but his reign is marked by instability and fear. The very foundations of the empire he is a part of are crumbling under the weight of internal strife and external pressures. As the fragile peace between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire crumbles, Vlad senses an opportunity. The Ottomans are desperate to secure Wallachia, seeking a puppet ruler who can keep the region stable and subservient. Vlad, with his years of training and experience, fits the bill perfectly. When the Ottomans finally agreed to send him back to Wallachia, they believe they are reclaiming a lost piece of their empire. What they do want to realize is that the Vlad they are sending back is not the frightened teenager they once took captive. He has emerged as a cold, calculating leader, ready to take his rightful place on the throne. And so ends our journey into the formative years of Vlad the Impaler, a period that has been shrouded in mystery and speculation throughout history. From his humble beginnings as a nobleman's son to his harrowing experiences in Ottoman captivity, Vlad's life has been a series of challenges that have shaped him into the enigmatic ruler we know him to be. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about the fascinating historical figures, please subscribe. Your support allows us to continue bringing these captivating stories to life. Thank you for joining us today. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and above all, stay tuned. Vlad the Impaler had made enemies, not just any enemies, those capable of ending his dynasty, destroying his realm and burying his legacy under the ruins of Wallachia. His name echoed through medieval Europe like a curse, and all the while he'd proven his mettle against the Turks. He'd won battles and struck terror among seasoned janissaries, yet none of it earned him allies. When the guns fell silent and the last arrow was loosed, all that remained was the question: who would end the reign of Vlad the Impaler? And the answer came riding on the wings of an eagle, emblazoned on a red standard, sharp as a winter wind and hungry as a wolf. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, the ruler of Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine East, the master of the janissaries, had set his sights on Vlad. Why? Because no one challenged the Ottomans and got away with it. No one insulted their emissaries and survived. No one spat on their banners and lived to tell the tale. But Vlad Țepeș did all of those things and more. He was an anomaly, a thorn, a festering wound that needed to be ripped out, even if it meant ripping apart the fabric of Wallachia. So the Ottomans descended like a blizzard, burying the land, drowning the rivers, engulfing the plains, and storming every fortified town in sight, all except one. Vlad had vanished. He'd left the defense of his realm to his brother Radu and fled deep into the mountains with a small entourage, watching the Ottomans conquer everything he'd left behind. And when the dust settled, they discovered the true extent of his scorched earth policy. Every village was razed, every granary burned, every well poisoned, every bridge destroyed. The Ottomans now occupied a ghost realm, a shadowland with no hope of sustenance, no path to victory. And as they watched their supplies dwindle, the weather worsen and the spirits of the land turn against them, Mehmed the Conqueror made a horrifying discovery. Vlad had used disease as a final defense, infecting the very water they drank with a plague that would decimate his ranks. Faced with defeat and pestilence, Mehmed ordered his army to retreat. The conqueror had met his match. Vlad had won. His realm was saved. Except when the Ottoman army withdrew, they left behind something far worse than disease: fear. For months, Vlad's forces had been working tirelessly, digging, sharpening, hoisting, and now the Ottoman soldiers found out what they'd been building toward. As they reached the end of the long road, the entire valley opened up before them, revealing a landscape crafted from agony. Bodies, impaled bodies everywhere. Some victims were soldiers captured, Turkish scouts or deserters. Others were prisoners of war. Some were merely peasants caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. None were spared. Children were impaled alongside their mothers, elders alongside infants. The stakes varied in size and thickness, creating a grotesque skyline of suffering. It was said that some stakes were so tall, the corpses at the top swayed like banners in the wind. Others were short, angled to drag out death slowly, causing hours of excruciating pain. Birds nested in eye sockets, wolves gnawed at dangling legs, flies hummed over the sea of decay like a funeral choir. The stench carried for miles. When Mehmed and his men finally arrived at the gates of Targovik, they expected a siege. What they found instead shattered them. Vlad had used death to build a fortress that didn't need guards because the only way out was through death. A fortress whose occupants wouldn't surrender because death had already taken them. There was nothing left to do but go home. The most powerful empire in the world turned back. Vlad had defeated them without raising a sword. But the Forest of the Impaled was not just a tactical victory. It was a manifesto, a declaration of how Vlad saw the world. To him, death was not sacred. It was a message board, a theater, a form of communication louder than diplomacy, clearer than treaties. And once he realized the power of this spectacle, he used it again and again, and the legends began to swell. In Germany, pamphlets depicted Vlad as a demonic figure, dining with the impaled. In Russia, he was seen as a holy avenger, harsh but necessary. In Hungary, they spoke of a tyrant who laughed as children were boiled alive. In the Ottoman Empire, he was whispered about in the same breath as jinn and devils. And in Wallachia, the people, caught between reverence and horror, called him what he had always been, Țepeș, the Impaler. Welcome to Dark Hours Archive. If you found this journey into darkness compelling, don't forget to subscribe. Here, the shadows are deeper, the silence is louder, and the past never sleeps. Tonight we delve into the abyss of one of history's most infamous figures, Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad the Impaler. A man so brutal, so merciless, so downright scary that even the mere mention of his name sends shivers down the spine. But was he a monster or a necessary evil? You decide. Like and share this video with those who dare to enter the darkness with me. And don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts on Vlad's legacy. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, and until next time, may your days be dark and your nights be filled with nightmares.